Twitch, honey, you destroyed one of your brother's oldest friendships because it hurt your feels when a child dared to resent an invasion by a genocidal army. You are not some herald of togetherness and interspecies communion. You are a selfish, privileged brat who can't see beyond your own comfort and sentiment. Hello, my wonderful viewers, and welcome to another episode of Betty Adams Overanalyzes. Today, we are going to take a fully spoilery look at some of the more of Transformers EarthSpark Season 1 Last Hope. Episodes somewhere between 22 and 26, depending on how much money you are forking over to Paramount+. The morals presented in this episode are vile. Some of it is fairly simple, obvious bad writing. There's a classic trope of a scene, for instance, that is shoved in because it was cool in the moment, but that makes absolutely no sense and all in context. This is simple bad writing. Then there is the character destruction of Twitch, caused by either the writer of this episode having no idea what happened in the episode Pair Home, or just not caring. This might be a higher level of bad writing, or it might be the result of studio interference, but it is still bad storytelling. Then there is just the warped black and white morality. There are bad guys, and everything they do is bad because they are bad guys, and if anybody else who does the same thing is also bad because that's the thing that bad guys do. However, the show puts entirely reasonable concerns in the mouths of these bad guys, thereby tainting the concerns with the bad guy vibe. The clear implication is that good people don't worry about those concerns, which would be bad enough in the isolation of an episode or a season or a series. But EarthSpark is supposed to be a spiritual successor to G1, and near 40 years ago, that is 2 full human generations ago, Transformers addressed both of the main issues with grace and nuance that this show delegates strictly to bad people things. Top that all off with the show's prime example of bad directing. The whole point of this show, from episode 1 to 26, is that the Maltos are a family, human and mechanical alike. But twice now, the show has, through the artwork, through the direction, shown something different. Has shown on the screen that there's a clear difference between the human and the robot children. This is just bad directing, but we are about to get into the spoilers, so I'm going to give you a chance to click away. You can go check out the links below the video to get yourself a copy of my latest author-read audiobook, Humans Are Weird, We Took a Vote, or any of my ebooks. Now remember, this is an author-read audiobook. That means I am untrained and unprofessional, but I was told that this audiobook is much better than the last one. If you thought the last one was worth the purchase price, this one probably will be too. Back to the show. This is the final episode pair of the season, and the writers decided that Twitch, the big sister of the Maltobots, the effective oldest child, gets the big final speech of the season. Fair enough. After the combined forces of the Decepticons and the Maltos and most of Ghost, let me repeat that, have beat down Mandroid and foiled his dastardly plot to suck the energon out of every Cybertronian on the planet, the brutally beaten Twitch makes a big speech about how he, Mandroid, is a terrible person who is not saving the world at all. How it is the Maltobots who are saving the world by bringing everyone together in love and friendship. It would have been a serviceable enough final speech if it wasn't perfectly artistically and thematically matched with the scene in Home, where Twitch destroys Robbie's oldest friendship because her privileged little feelings got hurt. To have Twitch, of all the Maltos, give this speech was just idiotic on the writer's part. To have her give it in this artistic context with everything from the lighting to this being a 2-part event episode to the looming presence of the red and blue stone around them, all hearkening back to home, was levels upon levels of stupidity. In that interaction in home with Robbie's friend, all the boy, this child, did was point out that Twitch was being unreasonable. Recall at this point in the story, the world at large does not know about the Multibots. They don't even know they exist. To the best of the world's knowledge, all Transformers on Earth are either Autobots or Decepticons, one Imperial force or another that brought their war to this world. The graffiti artist in that show is expressing the very natural resentment that Earth is being occupied by two armed invading armies, both of which cause massive destruction, loss of life, leaving countless people cold, hungry, homeless, and dead in their quest for energy. Let's not forget that the graffiti artist is also responding to Decepticons who are actively attempting xenocide. And in the face of all this history, this perfectly reasonable resentment, Twitch whines that it hurts her feelings. She implies through her statements that the graffiti artist was morally wrong to desire that the invading armies leave the planet, because the grammar used could technically have referred to her and her siblings. Despite the fact that, again, I cannot stress this enough, no one knows the Terrans exist. Twitch's response here is the epitome of a pampered first world child taking offense in ignorance and arrogance. How very dare someone express an opinion that makes me feel bad? When Robbie's friend points out that the graffiti artist is responding to a literal alien invasion, Twitch flounces off in a huff, and Robbie, out of loyalty to his sister, cuts off his friendship in a show of solidarity. Robbie outright states that the other boy is not worthy of friendship because he failed to agree enthusiastically enough with Twitch's selfish, self-centered little tantrum. Muse on that. Go back and focus on that. The main character of the show, in a scene that is presented as him being right, says that this child does not deserve friendship because he asked a person to show a little empathy. This episode further goes on to confirm the wrongness of the child and the correctness of Twitch's response, even going so far as to artistically compare the child, who only pointed out that people do resent having their homelands invaded, to the main xenocidal villains of the show. Then here, at the end of Season 1, the stage shows that there is a clear artistic link between the two Twitch rant scenes. You have the self-righteous Twitch blathering on about how we bring people together. The blinding hypocrisy of this moment kicked me right out of the show. I recoiled in disgust. This is classic protagonist-centered morality, of course. Having whatever the hero of the show needs in the moment being the standard by which all actions are judged is a common enough problem in any children's show. But the bad writing in EarthSpark cranks this up to 11. A child makes the main character feel bad, and therefore the child is shown to be just like a literal xenocidal maniac. This is all made so much worse by the fact that Robbie is half Filipino. If you know anything about the history of the Philippine Islands, you know that for nearly 500 years they were under the rule of one invading empire after another. Eventually, they fell into the hands of the United States of America, and something amazing happened. Something that had perhaps never happened in the history of imperial invasions of islands, or just imperial invasion in general. The United States agreed to recognize the independence of the Philippines, agreed to recognize their right to choose who ruled them. Not in the face of war or rebellion, though there had been armed rebellions in the Philippines. There were still Filipino patriots out there willing to stand up to the United States Marines to get their independence. But that's not what was going on. This was through peaceful negotiations. The Filipinos had mastered the art of speaking softly and carried a big stick. And they talked to the Americans, and the American talks to them, and they shook hands and said, okay, it's going to take a few years, but we're going in the early parts of the 20th century. They shook hands and said the Philippines will be a recognized independent nation, and it was all set to go down in 1947. 10-year decolonization period, and the Americans would be gone. 1947. Again, 1947. So yeah, then World War II happened, and the Philippines got invaded one more time. The suffering the Filipinos endured when the Japanese invasion came was horrific, but the Filipinos resisted. They endured. They fought when the American fleet left, and they were still fighting when the American fleet returned. They fought side by side with the U.S. forces, counted them as brothers. But when the war was over, the Filipinos still wanted the Americans gone, wanted them and every other foreign invader to go home. And for the most part, the U.S. did leave. Right on schedule, not letting the war stop them, all the American government forces packed up and left. For the first time in half a millennium of suffering and invasion, the Filipinos were a self-governing nation. Except for, the massive U.S. Air Force base representing the might of the U.S. Pacific Fleet, which had just won a war. This was the culture my father stepped into when he was stationed at the remaining U.S. Air Force base back in the early 70s. He saw the exact same graffiti that Twitch would have seen on the streets as he walked, and he could be very sure it was directed at him. Outsiders go home. And it never occurred to him or any of his brother airmen to resent that, because it was a perfectly logical, perfectly reasonable resentment on the part of the Filipino population. It wouldn't be until a volcano erupted, destroying the Air Force Base years later, that the last traces of that invasive presence would be gone. This is a history dump, I know, but Pop Malto is Filipino. He's a Filipino who's heavily implied was raised in the Philippines and is heavily in touch with his Filipino heritage. And he has passed that heritage on to his children. When you give your Filipino characters a clear tie to the culture of their grandfather's time, their grandfather, who likely would have been of the proper age to be a graffiti artist, writing graffiti just like the kind my father saw, then when you do that, and then you demonize the resentment of an occupied population, demonizing the very natural, very reasonable resentment they would feel, this is a level of irony and storytelling that can only be born out of ignorance and stupidity on the writer's part. They made Robbie Filipino. And then they made Robbie cut off his friend because his friend expressed the slightest resentment that the fact that his homeland had been invaded by an external force with highly superior technology. And that is the scene that is directly connected to this scene in this episode of Twitch just going on about how open-minded she is. She has the gall to announce that the Maltos are the ones making the world a better place. She says this just after the Maltos have released a pack of Decepticons loose on Earth. Cons, each of one of which has a proven track record of mindless violence or completely disregard of human safety. And in Shockwave's case, flat-out xenocidal murderous intentions just as pronounced as Agent Croft's. These stupid moral and tactical decisions don't just circle the Malto children either. I was wondering where Agent Shoulder and Bumblebee were. And in these episodes, we see them tossed into cells with the Decepticons. Why Agent Croft had her robots toss them in with Bumblebee's brother and companion Breakdown, thereby giving them a handy ally, I don't know. But once more, this kind of villainous stupidity is one of those things that we agree to suspend our disbelief over in shows like this. I think this particular bit of moronic this is referenced in the famous list of things a supervillain should never do, or list of things to never do as a supervillain, and don't house your prisoners together. At least there is a bit of a logical reason. After all, Agent Croft is the only human in Ghost who knows about the murder all the Cybertronians plan. She is the only human in Ghost working on that. So it makes sense she can't let any of the other agents see an imprisoned Agent Shoulder. But if the reason that 3 prisoners were packed into one cell is that Agent Croft is the only evil Ghost agent, then the next step makes no sense at all. Our erstwhile heroes decide to let all the Decepticons go because Ghost cannot be trusted. This is stupid on both tactical and moral levels. The current situation is at least a third Shockwave Shockwave doing, as he stated he was working with Agent Croft. The rest of Ghost does not know about what was going on, as shown by Agent Schuller's reaction and the reactions of the other humans. The show goes out of its way to demonstrate that those three are behind the problems: Croft, Mandroid, and Shockwave, meaning that now they have proof of Croft's behavior. All they have to do is report it up the chain of command, something no one thinks about doing or talks about doing at any point, or even just bring up that the other humans from Ghost and the problem is solved. Instead, our moronic heroes set all the Decepticons loose, a decision the show decides to richly reward, showing that the writers think this the moral decision. It is like the writers for this episode, much like the writers of the episode Pair Home, did not read the rest of the scripts. Those are not random Decepticons. Optimus has showed repeatedly that he and Ghost were willing to let cons coexist on Earth peacefully. Optimus has even been willing to let cooperative cons go without telling Ghost. That means that the Decepticons in these cells were too violent, too irrational to be reasoned with, even by Optimus Prime. You can make an argument for freeing Breakdown. But in previous episodes, we saw the Croc Con go on violent rages. Swindle was endangering human life left and right the moment we saw him, and the Insecticons are notoriously violent and animalistic. Soundwave was a Decepticon high command, and therefore was supervising the overall xenocidal Decepticon invasion of Earth. Yes, the cons are being mistreated at Ghost, but again, we come back to the fact that the show displayed on screen that was Agent Croft, and almost Agent Croft alone, with not even her second in command knowing what her plans were. Now, these violent Decepticons have been let loose, and anyone they kill in their rampages are now on the Maltobots' hands. Anyway, this is made so much worse by making the characters Filipino and giving them a strong connection to their grandfather. When the Imperial Japanese forces retreated from the Philippines, they left behind several stranded commandos. These men were single-minded zealots, blindly following their last orders, who were too focused and too narrow-minded to figure out that they should surrender. The last known Imperial soldier didn't surrender until the mid-70s, and everyone in the Philippines knew that these crazies could be out there in the forests, surrounded by booby traps, slowly going mad from isolation and despair and starvation. The prospect of this lingering threat of the Imperial Japanese commandos out in the Pacific Islands was a very real danger that the Filipino people faced for decades. Having the Maltos free the Decepticons just has association that, in retrospect, are so profoundly stupid. But what do you think, my wonderful viewers? Am I being too harsh on Twitch? Leave a comment telling me what you think in the comment section below. Hit that like and subscribe button, and peace out, my wonderful viewers. Humans are weird. We took a vote. The second book of Human Absurdity is now available in audiobook format everywhere where audiobooks are sold: Barnes & Noble, Google Play, Kobo by Rakuten, and of course, Audible and Amazon. So you can now get a copy of the audiobook format of all 70,000 words of Human Absurdity.